Hi, BookTube, and welcome to my Friday reads. I've completed 2 books, Siphonophore by Jaimie Batchan, a novel, and Michael E. Veal, dub, which is non-fiction. But I'm going to start with a novel. So the first thing is that I know Jaimie Batchan because he's the co-host of the Unsound Methods podcast, which I've appeared on. And it talks to writers about their approach to writing and their sort of, writing processes and stuff. And I'll post the link to my interview on the show. But this is his debut novel. And it starts off, we are in sort of just before 1700. And MacGregor is a jailer in Scotland. And a woman who's condemned to death becomes pregnant under his watch. And therefore she cannot be hanged because, she's pregnant with a child. And MacGregor is sort of, is booted out of the job, his life is falling apart, and he's recruited to join a 5-ship expedition to Panama, which is to be Scotland's first colony. This is, sort of, it reminds me a bit of the premise of The Space of Bohemia, where the main character there becomes the first Czech man in space to sort of put the Czech Republic on the map. And it's the same sort of logic here. MacGregor is recruited as a map maker. So the 5 ships sail to this area in Panama called Darien, which they sort of rename New Edinburgh. And like the early colonists in America, a lot sort of perish from malnutrition and from disease. And the colony isn't really flourishing. And MacGregor stands up to criticise the leadership, but no one else in the audience gets up behind him to back him up. So he very much becomes the sort of the whipping boy of the colony. And all of this world building is done so supremely well in sort of absolutely sort of authentic language and atmosphere. It's done very efficiently in terms of, it does take pages and pages and pages and pages. So just to give you an idea of the quality of the writing. The process of my execution has begun. My Darien wields the axe, and I am naught but neck. So, great, as I say, it's that sort of 18th century sort of style of sort of, very accomplished use of words and metaphors that sort of trip off the tongue. They're not sort of self-conscious. They almost sort of naturally flow from the quill. So we have 29 pages of this. As I say, very efficiently, very quickly, we are immersed in this atmosphere. But there's 1 or 2 little fissures, such as the use of the word joule, as in the unit of electricity. Now, joules weren't named until 180 years later. So there are these little anachronisms. And then you realise, this isn't bad writing, this is deliberate, because on page 29, we get this. This is MacGregor speaking. MacGregor is the narrator throughout this book. I guess what I'm saying is this. Don't think my creator didn't want to do the necessary research. Don't relish the opportunity to share what may be the last days of my life while nitpicking about the language I use or some technical maritime detail that slips like a stone through the gaps in my words. You'll only notice if you have some esoteric knowledge of naval technology at the end of the 17th century. If you do possess such mental flotsam, congratulate yourself, but don't expect credit from me. Literature still means something to my culture. It's not a game of I Spy for us, nor a busted flush, a discarded husk. Robinson Crusoe, the entity with whom I share so much, will not be published for another 19 years. Just think of all the art I have ahead of me. It's only natural for you to look back at me through jaded lenses. For you, there are no new ideas, surrounded as you are by a slew of reboots, mashups and sequels, whereas I get to savour the earliest days of the novel as art form. So MacGregor is addressing us, the reader, but also when he says his creator, previously we've assumed that's meant, the God-fearing divinity that people from the 17th century worship. No, the creator is the author of MacGregor, who created MacGregor. And he is in constant dialogue, although the writer isn't sort of given a perspective point of view. We get it all through MacGregor. He's in constant dialogue because the writer discovers that he has a fatal brain illness, and it's a race against time to finish this book. a bit like Agape Agape by William Gaddis. Although there, Gaddis's character in the hospital is writing with every sort of last ounce he can summon. Here, the writer has always been a sort of bit of a procrastinator, always sort of looks, gets sort of distracted by things online and stuff. And now is fretting about his life falling apart, that he's going to die soon, that his girlfriend, is she going to stick by him, and all of that. All of this McGregor is addressing, because McGregor has an equal pressing thing, which is the island that they're on is, as I say, is Panama, and it's, sort of the Spanish Empire is all around it. And eventually the Spaniards cross over to basically storm the colony, and all the colonists get back in the ships and flee, except McGregor, who is left behind, hence the Robinson Crusoe sort of theme. And he needs the novel finished in which he is the protagonist, because he wants to get back, he needs to get back to Scotland, otherwise he's going to perish on this desert island. So he has a high stake in the author finishing the book. So both of them are sort of racing against time, but McGregor is struggling because his creator, the author, is not delivering the goods, and it becomes increasingly less about McGregor and more about the life of the creator, the life of the writer. And it's a fiendishly clever sort of portrayal of the two and their relationship. And this is called Siphonophore. I think a siphonophore is possibly the longest animal in the world. It's part of the sort of jellyfish family, and it has that sort of jar. I don't know if you'd call it a head, where its sort of nervous system, I suppose, is located. But the head doesn't feed. What it has is one massive long tentacle, similar to jellyfish. But the difference with the siphonophore is that tentacle is not one part of the same. It is part of the same beast, but it's formed of lots and lots of other little animals, each with their own sort of ingestion and sort of tentacles to catch their plankton prey. And I think that the point of the Siphonophore, calling it Siphonophore, is that the writer and the character McGregor are like creatures on, they're linked creatures on this sort of massive long thing of a Siphonophore, as are all fictional characters in a book, as are all the people in the writer's life, in this case, such as his girlfriend and his parents and other past loves that he's sort of thinking about and stuff. And it's sort of, exponentially expanding sort of community or colony, hence the colony of New Edinburgh here. As I say, it's just fiendishly clever, it's very satisfying, very enjoyable. And I'm just going to read one more section. My land is vulnerable to the inexorable slide of entropy as anywhere else. The buildings of New Edinburgh have already succumbed to the damp, garrotted by the vines that bind anything static. My creator could clear the bush for me at the sweep of his hand, just as he could bestow upon me a castle, a companion, or an unending source of food. But of course this is not how the divine operates. I am made to understand that I should embrace every challenge that comes my way as a gift. I know I shouldn't question him or his methods, but there is so much that happens in his other life that he can't see, or won't see, or refuses to acknowledge and accept. So that's a sort of a statement of a writer. A writer has to sort of have a depth of vision into the lives and thoughts of their characters. And here the character is accusing the writer of going, well, how can you do that successfully when you can't even see the same in your own life, which you have a privileged access to, which is something that, has sort of explored in HHHH by Laurent Binet. Now there he's writing, academic history rather than fiction, as in here. But Binet, also does that thing of, well, the writer's having a bad day, he's got a cold. He wants to give Himmler, who he's writing about, the real-life historical character of Himmler, a red nose because he's got a cold and it's sort of obsessing his thoughts as at that moment that he's sat down. And, that is explored all the way through here, whereas in HHHH it was only just a sort of one idea, one suggestion, and then, sort of left. It is, I suppose, in that sense, an investigation into the influences that go into writing, and the fact that writers are human beings, you know, and they have moods, they have emotions, and that can impact their writing. So as I say, all in all, you know, a delightful, clever read, and I gave this 5 stars. And on to Dub by Michael Veal. So I picked this book up and another one on Dub for some research for a piece of writing, fictional writing I'm doing. But actually this book surpassed that, because it didn't just give me everything I needed for the research, which it did, but it gave me a lot of sort of pleasure outside of that, in that obviously lots of music is referenced, and I went away to listen to it and in some cases purchase it. I also learnt a lot of stuff that wasn't going to be part of my research about Jamaica, because, you know, I've always been a reggae fan, and, you know, I've got lots of bits of disparate information that I've picked up along the way about Jamaica and about the culture and how reggae arose, and Rastafarianism and Nyabangi, sort of traditional African drumming from Ethiopia. So all these sort of disparate bits of information, and this book managed to wonderfully weave them together in a coherent sort of framework that it all came together. So to give you an example of that, I was unaware that there were very few live bands in Jamaica, live reggae bands, dedicated bands. I mean, Bob Marley obviously was the big breakout band, but even after Bob Marley and the Wailers, there was still, you know, the culture was not live bands touring Jamaica and playing concerts. It was very much the sound system culture, where DJs would have sort of these enormous banks of speakers and amplifiers, and would set up in a field in the open air. Obviously Jamaica has the climate, and that that sort of setup is how people got, you know, danced basically weekends and stuff. And that sound system explains exactly sort of how dub arose, and the way it arose was because these competing sound systems wanted sort of a unique set of records to play that were different from the other sound systems. So what they would do is they would go to the studios of the sound engineers and mixers, such as King Tubby, such as Lee Scratch Perry, Prince Jaimie, Bunny Lee. And these guys were taking established reggae tunes, and then they were sort of a bit like sort of hip-hop artists, you know, sort of scratching records. But these guys did it through the mixing desk, where they would sort of chop up the original coherent song and, you know, use faders and delays and reverb and echo and all this sort of stuff to take out elements and completely reconstitute the song as a soundscape rather than as a song. And you know, often the vocals were taken out, or just 1 or 2 lines were left in and repeated and stuff. And they would cut these on a sort of short-lived, perishable wax record form called a dub plate, hence the name dub. And the sound system guys would come on a Friday to the studios, pick up their unique dub plate and go back and play it. And because there was very little vocals on these dub records, DJs or toasters would speak or sing over the top of them. But the key thing was the music, because that's what people were dancing to. They were less concerned with the vocals. And that really is the origin of dub. And the first thing to say is that dub was relatively short-lived from the sort of late 60s, early 70s through to the mid-80s, when reggae itself sort of suffered and dropped off. And a lot of the engineers had left Jamaica because of the violence there. And yet the influence of dub and the influence of that approach to sound and music, breaking up sort of unified songs into elements and fragments, you know, has influenced so many different musical genres ever since, and still does to this day. So, you know, I learnt so much, and it's basic. I will say the introduction was not very satisfying. The introduction was a bit all over the place because it was trying to cover so much. But then you get into the actual individual producers and engineers, and what you realise is that a lot of these guys were just sort of, you know, tech geeks in their youth, whereby they would, you know, build their own transistor radios or amplifiers. And that's how they sort of naturally drifted towards being in a studio, and gradually they were able to showcase their skills enough to be put in charge of the mixing desk. And this is the 70s, so the technology was very crude. This wasn't digital musical producing. They started out with 2-track recording studios, not like the 24, 32, 64 track we have today. But they made an absolute asset of that sort of primitive technology, because that was where they were getting the strange sounds that populated their music. So, as I say, I mean, this was just fabulous on every level. And again, 5 stars. And as to what I'm currently reading, well, from Siphonophore to Another Marine Animal, this is The Octopus Man by Jasper Gibson, which I'm about a third of the way through. I hope to finish this by the end of February, because March the 1st I start a buddy read of William Gaddis's The Recognitions with Noah. Everyone who reads must converse. So I need to finish this. So, a really good reading week, all in all. Both 5-star reads in very different genres, fiction and non-fiction. So, till next time, thanks very much.